Director of Corporate. Hello and welcome. Good afternoon. I am Tony Cusimano, Director of Corporate Security with Magna International and a retired member of York Regional Police. I am the co-chair of the OACP Police Private Security Liaison Committee, along with Chief Superintendent Matt Peggs of the RCMP. On behalf of Chief Peggs and myself, welcome to this webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us here today as we talk about mass marketing fraud. The foundation and vision of our OACP committee is built on the strength of information sharing, networking, and learning best practices from both the public and the private sector. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's session. The goal and objective of this session is to leave you with enhanced prevention strategies as it pertains to mass marketing fraud prevention. The 3 R's: recognize, reject, and report, with a focus on public awareness and education. This webinar is made possible with the collaboration of the OACP subcommittee of the Police Private Security Liaison Committee and the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. During the webinar, there'll be an opportunity to submit questions and interact through the chat feature. Also, don't worry about making notes, as the session will be recorded and will be made available through the OACP. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our presenter, Acting Detective Sergeant John Armit of the RCMP, of the Ontario Provincial Police. Acting Detective Sergeant John has been a member of the Ontario Provincial Police for 21 years. John has worked at the Prince Edward County, Larned County, and Ottawa traffic OPP detachments in general investigations duties, major crime, and as a community service and media officer. In 2015, John began working with the OPP Anti-Rackets branch, investigating economic crimes and political corruption. In May of 2021, John began a secondment with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre as a law enforcement liaison officer. Thank you, Detective Sergeant Armit, for taking time to share this session with us here today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Detective Sergeant Armit. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for introducing me, and thank you to the Ontario Associations of Chiefs of Police for inviting myself and the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre to present. It's an honor to present to your group and your participants. As mentioned, I'm the seconded member over to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, and my role is a liaison officer nationally and internationally. So without further ado, we'll get into the presentation. And as was mentioned, our focus and our tagline is to recognize, reject, and report frauds. So what is the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre? Well, here's a picture of our location in North Bay. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre is a joint management team headed by the RCMP in partnership with the Ontario Provincial Police and the Competition Bureau of Canada. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre is the repository, Canadians' repository for data, intelligence, and resource-related materials as it relates to fraud. The Canadian Fraud Centre commits to providing timely, accurate, and useful information to assist citizens, businesses, law enforcement, and government of Canada and governments around the world. So you'll see here the different logos. We all work in close partnership to run the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. In 2021, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre was realigned under the RCMP Technical Operations Division to be closely aligned with our partners, the National Cybercrime Coordination Centre, also known as NC3. We are developing a new database, which is going to merge our intelligence holdings. And to delineate the difference between the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre and NC3 is NC3 focuses on crimes such as ransomware, malware, cybercrime, data breaches, and other cyber intrusions, where the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre focuses on crimes such as identity crimes, romance frauds, business email compromise, advanced fee frauds, and spear phishing or phishing. We work very closely, and we have seconded members within the NC3, and we share our information back and forth seamlessly. So what are our goals in the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre? Well, today's presentation is our major goal. It's prevention through education awareness. We'll talk about our fraud prevention month that just passed in the month of March and what we focused on. And we continue to focus on different fraud trends throughout the year that we see. And we'll talk a little later about how you folks can jump on and receive our information, whether it be social media or through email. The second goal is our disruption. We know we can't arrest our way out of cybercrime, but we know that we can disrupt and make it difficult for criminals. So we'll talk about that and how we actually action those activities and some success stories we've had. Intelligence is a massive platform within the Canadian Fraud Centre. We work closely with all of our law enforcement partners, and in fact, we work with private industry as well to receive information and disseminate intelligence. We've had great success doing this. The other aspect is support to our law enforcement community. We encourage our law enforcement community to disclose their fraud reports to the Canadian Fraud Centre, and we have a special generic law enforcement address specifically for our law enforcement partners. And the other aspect is building partnerships with our private sector and the public sector in order to combat these frauds. So what makes up the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre? Well, we have 3 units, and I'll break down the units. But the first one is the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre's Fraud Prevention and Intake Office. And this is really, if you think of a police service with 911 dispatchers, we have call takers that will take people's calls throughout the day. We also have our online fraud reporting system called the FRS, the Fraud Reporting System. And our call takers will handle over 30 different fraud pitches, and they'll listen to the victims. They'll offer supports in their communities, and they'll give suggestions and recommendations on how the victims can mitigate their fraud losses and help them recover from their fraud. The second unit is our senior support unit, and this is a revolutionary unit that is really a concept that's being embraced worldwide. And the concept is seniors helping seniors. So we either have senior victims that now become volunteers, or we have seniors in the community that are volunteers, and they help us contact victims, provide presentations, and provide support for our victims. We also have student volunteers that come and help out. The other unit, which we'll talk a little further on, is the operational support unit, which I co-manage. So as mentioned, the senior support unit has 40 volunteers, and 10 of them are students. So our volunteers will, once we receive a complaint, we'll identify a victim who's over the age of 60 that may need assistance, and with their consent, we contact the victims as many times as needed for them to feel empowered to take back their life after being victimized of these frauds. We'll mail out information and crime prevention information, because we know that fraud victims that have provided funds have a higher chance of being re-victimized, because we know these fraudsters share out the information on who they've gotten money from. We also provide presentations to groups and associations, townships, communities, and what have you, and we'll show you how you can request those presentations. The senior support unit is the unit, as I mentioned, that I co-manage, and it's made up of members who work closely with law enforcement agencies, partnership, regulatory bodies in Canada and the US, public and private corporations, financial institutions, telephone and internet service providers, and we do this to detect and deter fraud and criminal operations in Canada internationally. The OSU also coordinates disruption programs with the aim of dismantling the tools that scammers use to communicate and receive money from the victims. In addition, we search our database. We have access to the FBI's Sentinel database and the Federal Trade Commission's database as well. Sorry, the FBI's database is IC3 and the FTC's is Sentinel database. So the operational support unit assists directly with law enforcement in their investigations. We provide investigative packages, and we provide this training and education like today, and we provide intelligence and disruption and international outreach. What we're going to talk about a little later is cryptocurrency frauds and how significant it's becoming within the fraud landscape. One of the aspects that we have with the operational support unit is the ability to conduct cryptocurrency tracing. So how bad is fraud in Canada in 2020? Well, 2020 was our highest fraud loss on record, and we had a total of $164 million in reported losses. Well, then 2021 comes around and it blew 2020 out of the water. Most police services, most businesses are seeing the increase in fraud attempts and frauds actually being facilitated. And this is represented in the losses. The losses doubled 2021 to a total of $379 million of reported losses. And some people may think that may not be a massive loss for the size of Canada, but when you put in context that it's estimated that 5% of fraud victims report their occurrences to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre or law enforcement, it's a pretty staggering number. So as a result of those numbers, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre really did a deep dive to find out what are the major frauds that are really being targeted to the private sector or to the general public. And so we decided this year's Fraud Prevention Month to discuss impersonation scams. So the first one was our investment frauds. And you can see here with the numbers, 163 million in 2021 versus 33 million in 2020. So these correlate directly with cryptocurrency investment frauds. The next is your spear phishing. People say, what is a spear phishing? Well, that's also known as a business email compromise, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But our losses were 53 million in 2021 versus 30 million in 2020. Extortion frauds would be your CRA, SIN card, CBSA calls, which for the most part originate out of India. And we're hearing the automated messaging, and they ask you to press 1, and then they tell you that you're going to be arrested for some reason, or your information has been compromised, and you have to withdraw all your funds from your bank and provide it to a bank investigator or police officer to ensure that your money's safe. Next, we have our service scams, and these are your door-to-door scams that we see with, suggesting you change your hot water tank and sign an agreement. And they also have to do with the Microsoft service scams, where they're requesting that you download some software, and they tell you that your system's compromised and you need to upgrade to a package. You overpay, and then you have to send the suspects your funds to correct the amount that you provided. The next one is phishing scams and identity thefts. We've seen a massive increase in this happening. As mentioned, cryptocurrency payments jumped to 77 million in 2021 versus 23 million in 2020. And we'll show in a few slides what is the method that our victims are sending money to fraudsters. So our victim demographics, we get asked all the time, what are the demographics for mass marketing frauds? Well, they're all correlated to population densities within Canada. We know that out of the 379 million in losses reported at the Anti-Fraud Centre in 2021, that Ontario represented 142 million of that. And it makes sense because Ontario has the largest population in Canada. Our victims span all education and socioeconomic backgrounds. We've had people that had worked in financial industries and what have you be scammed. So these are well-educated, smart people that are being victimized just like anyone else. And the demographics between males and females is equal. Again, the fraudsters don't care who you are, they just want your money. We do know that seniors tend to lose on average 33% more, and we do know that seniors are often targeted for re-victimization. As mentioned with the cryptocurrency losses, we're seeing an increase in victims under the age of 60. So this is your 35 to 55-year-olds that are thinking they can get in the crypto game, and they're providing their funds to a fraudster who's purporting to be a legitimate cryptocurrency exchange. We do know that 74% of the reports that we received to the Anti-Fraud Centre are cyber-enabled frauds. So the methodology of the victims, so the suspects, are using technology to target us. Here's some stats from our 2021 fraud losses by reports by losses. As mentioned, we saw the cryptocurrency being number 1. That's $163 million, which correlates to cryptocurrency. Romance frauds are exceptionally interesting because it has the lowest amount of victim for the highest amount of victim losses. So last year, our numbers doubled from 2020 to 64 million. And it's very devastating. I've actually arrested a few people for romance fraud. It was a very lengthy investigation, and we found that the victim, who was an emergency room nurse, she was a widow, and she now has lost her life savings, and the detective assisting in this case often provides her some food from the food bank. This is how devastating these crimes are. Our phishing scams, spear phishing, which are targeted businesses, they jumped, and extortion scams, which we talked about earlier. Our top 10 frauds by reports, identity fraud. Now, we had 30,000 reports in 2021. This correlates directly to the CERB or the government COVID benefits that was provided. And we know that fraudsters utilized different data breaches with different institutions within Canada and used that information to create false identities and apply for the different benefits. Again, extortion frauds were extremely high. Personal information and phishing have to do with identity frauds. You see these annoying smishing or SMM text message frauds where they have an embedded link and they want you to click and go to a website and add your information. They take your information and they do what they do best, get your money from you. So how are victims sending money? Well, we know that wire fraud, wire transfers are 149 million. And this correlates directly with the cryptocurrency investment frauds and romance frauds. Our next section is unknown because some of the reports that we received, they don't actually list what the method of remittance was, but that was 108 million. In cryptocurrency, as I mentioned, it's in red because it is quickly growing, and we believe that cryptocurrency losses are going to exceed wire transfer remittance in 2022. Direct deposits have to do directly with money business email compromise, and that's where a business has possibly collect malware, or there's been an email saying to pay this vendor, here's a change in our bank information, and the banks are paying the invoice and it goes directly to the bad guy's accounts. Often there's money mules that are involved, and the money moves over to the fraudsters at some point. E-transfers, this has to do with your classified online ads, the rental properties, or the puppy scams, job, and loans. And they typically use money mules to move the money throughout the system, and eventually it's pushed out to cash or cryptocurrency. And then the list goes on here. So this chart just shows the fraud trends. As we mentioned, these are the top frauds that we focused on for our Fraud Prevention Month. And you can see the blue is our 2020 stats, and our orange is 2021, which shows the massive increase in the fraud losses that we're experiencing. So in the operational support unit, we have members of our team that specifically work on disrupting bad guys' abilities to target individuals. You'll see here with our stats, they represent 10,000, almost 11,000 email addresses that we suppressed, that we sent to our partners who actually shut down their email addresses. In addition, you see almost 17,000 bank accounts that we disrupted. So the value in reporting to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre is that not only do we share the intelligence, but also we can now start to work closely with our partners to disrupt the fraudsters' abilities to get money from you. And by working with our financial institutions, we also alert them that there is fraud within their systems. The challenge we're having with websites is these websites are hosted overseas, and when we send a do not or cease and desist or advising the web-based hosts of fraudulent websites, they don't even respond to us. Our telephone numbers have been reduced because we're seeing fraudsters actually use a voice over internet protocol. And typically you can see this when you get a cell phone call, you're going to have a V with a long number, and that represents a voice over internet protocol number, and then they'll show the spoof number below. So those are warning signs that this is likely a fraudster. We work closely with our payment companies, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal. And then when we get fraudulent transactions on credit cards, we can notify them. We also work hard with our partners that sell high-end goods. And if they've identified counterfeit goods, we have something called Project Chargeback. And we're able to help the victims get their money back. And subsequently, the credit card companies or the merchant companies will actually shut down the merchant accounts. Typically, these are merchant accounts held in Asia. We talked about cryptocurrency. Well, how big is cryptocurrency as an issue? Well, we know that according to the chart on the left, that Canada is number 2 in the world for the amount of cryptocurrency ATM machines. We call these BTMs. And then on the right is a screen capture of a media article from a convenience store company that is North America wide, and they've indicated that they're going to be putting thousands of BTMs within their storefronts. So how significant are the reports that we're getting from cryptocurrency frauds? Well, in 2015, we only received 159 reports involving cryptocurrency payments. In 2020, this jumped up to over 9,000 reports. That's over a 5,600% increase in fraud reports involving cryptocurrency. As mentioned, 77.5 million reports were received associated cryptocurrency losses, and that's a significant jump from the 23 million in 2020. As mentioned, we believe this trend will be expedited and continue in 2022 and beyond. So what is the most popular cryptocurrency that's being used? We are seeing, based on our reports, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is one of the most popular cryptocurrencies out there. It's on social media. People are talking about it. It is the favored coin of use for fraudsters. And then second, we're seeing Ethereum, and then the list goes down. So this slide here shows you on the left-hand side is a QR code or a receipt that's printed out from what we have here on the right, which is an example of a BTM or a Bitcoin ATM. These are your typical ATMs that you're going to see within storefronts in different locations across Canada. As mentioned, Canada is number 2 in the world. So you can easily check where a BTM is located in your community by going to coinatmradar.com. You can put in your postal code and you'll be able to find exactly where these cryptocurrencies machines are for your convenience. And my next slide, I'll show you a result of the maps. So what we're seeing is victims, especially elderly victims. We had a case here outside of Ottawa where an elderly victim was encouraged to take her money out for a SIM card scam. She was driven around by a taxi cab driver who the victim was on the phone with the fraudsters the whole time. She was encouraged to go to different financial institutions in order to not alert the bank. She took out a total of $70,000. She put that into the cryptocurrency ATM. It spit out the QR code that you see here. The victim took a photo, sent it to the fraudsters. The fraudsters were able to take that QR code, and now the cryptocurrency funds are now transferred into the suspect's wallet, and it's just that easy. Here's an example of the search results from coinatmradar.com, and you'll see that Toronto is a hub for the most, which makes sense for population density. And you'll see in the orange in the bottom that Toronto is half of New York City. And Toronto has, 4 million people in the GTA, where New York City has 12 million. So where are our cryptocurrency funds going? Well, based on our cryptocurrency tracing and production order results, and these are a version of search warrant, we're seeing Nigeria as number 1, which represents romance frauds that we tend to see. India, the extortion frauds or your call center frauds, and then the list goes down to the different countries around the world. So we have had some success. I am working with the Department of Justice to try and get funds back from Nigeria, and it will be the first success story we're going to have, but it's in the works, and it has to do with a victim out of Toronto that was involved with a romance fraud, sent money to Nigeria, and we have a great partnership with the Nigerian authorities and the RCP liaison officers, and we're working to get that money back. All that to be said is most times when your funds are gone overseas, they will move it from one wallet to another, which goes to another country, which makes it difficult. So how can the Canadian Fraud Center assist our partners? Specifically our law enforcement partners, but also our public partners. Well, we can search our database for any linkages, and we can provide these reports back to the police of jurisdiction. We can search our database for any ongoing investigation and see if there's another organization that has a similar investigation with similar linkages, and that's what we call deconfliction. So we can work with that. Specifically for our partners or private partners, we can provide you stats on the frauds to provide your corporate security managers or in police services for your policing managers. It also helps for Crown attorneys with synopsis for your cases and your briefs. We provide bulletins, we issue media releases, and we can provide presentations, and awareness sessions to your groups. As mentioned, when police services or the public report a senior victim being abused in these frauds, we can provide support for them directly. And as mentioned, we can take your information and then we can subsequently issue disruption services from there. We work closely with our national partners and our international partners. We have such a strong relationship with Homeland Security, U.S. Secret Service in the States, and they help us try and combat frauds in North America and worldwide. And as we mentioned, we can trace cryptocurrency and search our database for any cryptocurrency linkages and work with our policing partners. So here's a great success story. We mentioned business email compromise. This is a threat that's coming to your business. Business email compromise and ransomware kind of go hand in hand. And at the end of the day, they just want to get money from your business. We were notified of a Ontario business that had sent a wire transfer of $1.1 million over to the fraudsters. We notified our U.S. Secret Service partners. They were able to freeze the funds, and as a result, the business was able to receive 95% of their funds back. So again, by proactively disclosing to the Anti-Fraud Center, we can do what we do best. We can disrupt, we can coordinate, and we can deconflict. So how can businesses and victims report their fraud? So as we mentioned, we want to report, we want to reject, and we want to recognize. Well, reporting is reporting to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center and your police of jurisdiction. That's how we can work in tandem with police services. So we have a 1-800 number that here is on the screen. We also have our fraud reporting system, which is called FRS, and you can go to our webpage and you can add your report, and we get it instantaneously. So we have, as mentioned, we have our fraud prevention. We issue bulletins. We can provide statistics. We can notify you of the trends, and you can submit a request to us, and we can see what we can do to help you out. For businesses or townships or communities, if they want to receive this information, all they have to do is send a request to partners@antifraudcenter.ca, and you will receive this information automatically. This is an example of the toolkits. We have many toolkits that we produce. One is a media toolkit, the other one's a law enforcement, one's for seniors, and then the other ones we have for young Canadians, middle-agers, and what have you. So we produce these toolkits that have all the information on what the type of frauds that are targeting these individuals and how to prevent it. So it's a really great tip and tricks that we have within these toolkits. And simply by requesting this through partners at Anti-Fraud Center, you can receive one of these toolkits. We're very active on social media. We encourage all of our partners to join us on Twitter, on Facebook. Being an OPP member, we also amplify the Canadian Fraud Center's messages, and likewise with the RCMP and the Competition Bureau of Canada. As mentioned, our Fraud Prevention Month was in March, but we continue to put fraud prevention literature out. If you want to join us next March, we'd be happy to partner with our private partnerships and amplify our messaging. And here we are. We have some questions, I believe.
Don't see any questions come in.
Okay, wonderful. It was very thorough.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Detective Sergeant Armit. Very, very informative session. Thank you again to you and the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center for taking time out of your busy schedule to share this information with us. You know what? Thanks to all the law enforcement and partner agencies out there for their disruption activities in this ongoing effort to try and identify those responsible for these criminal activities. Detective Sergeant Armit, your message about prevention and awareness is truly a key takeaway, and with the strength of both the private and public sectors, we can continue to collaboratively work together towards disrupting these fraudulent activities. So thank you again for everything that you do, and stay safe and have a great afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.